Hello everyone, it's Turin here, and today guys, I'm here with another Total War Warhammer online commentary. In this battle, I'm going to be playing the Dwarves, and I'm facing off against the Empire. So I know quite a few of you had been asking for the Napoleonic DAWI, so I brought a little bit of that to the table. I do have two groups of Thunders, backed up by the Ulthar's Raiders, a Cannon, and a Gobblobber, so a lot of range units. And the Empire is one of the few factions when you're playing the Dwarves that I feel like you can get away with that, because they are going to bring range units themselves, so a little bit of counterbalancing there. But as far as the Thunder firing squad, they work really well against the Empire with the Ulthar's Raiders. These guys give a pretty massive debuff. For those of you guys that haven't seen it before or new to Total War Warhammer, it's marked by Ulthar. So units that are essentially hexed by this unit will get negative 22% missile resist. They'll lower their armor and their missile parry if they have shields. It's quite strong. So if you get like two groups of Thunders and like a flying Empire Lord flies over you, and you get that big like firing punch with the two groups of Thunders and the Mark of Ulthar, it can really just decimate their ranks. So pretty good stuff there. Well, I wouldn't say ranks, it'll decimate their Lord. But aside from that, I have a kind of a mixed up front line. I have two groups of Dwarf Warriors on the flanks. I do have some Longbeards with great weapons and the Grumbling Guard in the center, who do have that nice Vigor aura. So if we go ahead and take a look here, the aura of influence is pretty big. You can see it's hitting most of my troops in that pocket. So you definitely want to have a little bit of a tighter formation. Though, going wider is a little bit better against, like, cannon fire and things like that, but having a more dense formation isn't so bad against the Empire from my experience, because normally they're going to be pressuring you with cav and things like that. So that's pretty much it for my front line. I do have the Raiders, some Miners in the back to kind of just plug things up, a single group of Slayers, the Gobblobber, as well as a Cannon. For my opponent over here, he has a whole front line of greatswords, which is, I wouldn't say it's the most common. Usually, not usually, but usually you see people mix up like groups of greatswords with like halberds or things like that to be a little bit more wide and a little bit more dense in terms of just like cost effectiveness. But, front line of greatswords is, intuitively speaking, pretty good against the Dwarves. They have good AP. They have a traditional anti-infantry bonus of +8. So Dwarves typically, as can be inferred, are just going to be all infantry. So these greatswords will, should do pretty well. Granted, they're going to take some heavy damage from that Gobblobber. You can see over here they've already taken quite a bit. He does have the mighty Karl Franz up here as his lord. He has the Zintler's Reichsguard vanguarded here in the forest, and Stirland's Revenge, the Free Company. These guys are great against the Dwarves, like one of my favorite picks, because the Dwarves obviously have a pretty good missile presence, but the Stirland's Company, if used correctly, you can get them in a very ideal firing position and trade pretty effectively. And this was something that I thought was a bit interesting, and I've been seeing it lately. I don't know if someone made a guide like talking about this, but people have been using Pistoliers to shoot down my Slayers. So they bring the Pistoliers with their, I think they're like, they got the dual pistol action. They look pretty cool there. But they go around the back and they just kind of pick off your Slayers, which is pretty interesting, because against like low armored targets, they hit hard. They got 42 weapon damage, or missile damage. So pretty neat stuff over there. He does have another group of Pistoliers over here on the far side in Vanguard, and he does have the Silver Bullets over here. So that's pretty much it for both of our armies here, and let's get right down to the business. So over here in the front, you can see that these greatswords are just getting absolutely destroyed, and the cannon fire in here is tearing into some of these greatswords as well, doing some pretty good damage. And the Gobblobber is surprisingly accurate, even against these like moving targets. It's funny, just as I say that, it just like overshoots by like just a massive amount. But there you go, you can see it doing some serious work against these guys, just absolutely tearing them up, bringing them down to 62 models, and bringing them to the shaken status, which is pretty crazy considering like greatswords are technically a very elite unit. So over here on the far side, you can see the Pistoliers are doing a little bit of a drive-by shooting here, getting in there, just kind of poking away at my Slayers, who are trying to scurry away a little bit. But I do have a group of Thunders here in Auxiliary who did get a pretty good shoot, kind of volley on them and brought them down to 36 models almost instantly. So they're in pretty hot pursuit, but he is coming in with the Stirland's Free Company, so he's going to get some pretty good fire there. But you can see my Slayers taking some, pretty solid damage. But that fire in here is just taking these guys down. They're just getting just absolutely massacred by that Thunder fire. And Thunders are so good against like missile, like counter missile play. They just hit hard, they're shielded, they have good armor, so they're able to just rat off these Pistoliers and send them back to the Shadow Realm. Well, I guess they're wavering, so they'll probably break here in a moment. His other group of Pistoliers is coming in on the far side and is going to start pressuring some of my Slayers again. In the front line, my Thunder is here, just kind of in position. Thankfully, I did have one group in the front who's going to start trading with the Stirland's Free Company militia over here, and his Lord is flying over, taking a little bit of cannon fire. That direct hit there did a ton of damage, just tanking his leadership. But still, I am taking some, attrition here from the Free Company, but thankfully for me, it's on Dwarf Warriors, which are essentially designed for this type of thing. So these guys are getting in position. They're going to start teeing off on Karl Franz up here, who's taking a ton of damage right now. He's already down to about 70% HP. He does get a good charge here on some of these Dwarves, but I do have some Miners over here. I should have had them a little bit closer. I was definitely a little bit slow on my reaction there, but I do use the marks by Ulthar. But unfortunately, my opponent didn't commit to that, so he does pull back and is able to get away there. So on the backside, you can see my Slayers are just being trolled by these Pistoliers. So I definitely like that play from my opponent, kind of using that tactic to harass those guys. So in the front line, I do have to pull my Thunders back, obviously, because the greatswords are starting to press in. He does have the Silver Bullets, which aren't like a bad pick, because stock again is pretty good for like getting in position here. But Karl's having to run around. He is marked by Ulthar, taking quite a bit of damage. You can see my great weapons here. Over here, we're unfortunately going to get charged by these Reichsguard here. Take a little bit of damage. I hate that like when you see those like kind of effects pop up, it kind of like screws up the cinematics a little bit. But regardless, these miners are in here fighting pretty tooth and nail against these Reiksguard. He gets that big old karate chop in there, and this is actually a situation that's pretty great for the miners. They're backed up by Thorgrim over here, who's giving them the plus 12 melee attack, which is really going to make them make solid contact against these Reiksguard and trade extremely efficiently. So the Reiksguard are down to 34 models, haven't taken some pretty serious damage. So, and the cannon has switched focus onto the Reiksguard, so it should be shooting at those guys pretty soon. In the front line, we do have the Longbeards facing off against the Greatswords, which is I would say just in a straight up fight, the Greatswords would probably win. But granted, the Runesmith here, and of course Thorgrim, who is nearby, and the Vigor Aura definitely, you know, play into that really like kind of long game. So I think it'll, you know, with the Runesmith support, they should be able to win that battle. So in the front, it's just pretty much you know, a stalemate at this point. No one's really like decidedly winning. I would say it's a pretty even trade so far. So granted, these Greatswords did just get absolutely destroyed by that Goblob over here. So Karl Franz is taking a ton of crossfire. You can see that like every time he goes after one of my missile units, my Thunders and my Raiders are all kind of like turning and shooting at him. But in the back, I'm still taking a ton of Pistolier fire, and this was so annoying because he was just like gunning my Slayers down in the back, and you can see how like every few seconds I would go like pressure just to kind of keep him honest. But the issue is like, if I guess I could have kept some Dwarf Warriors back here, that probably would have been much smarter rather than keeping the Slayers. But I was just getting gunned down, and if I pull the Slayers to do something else, I'm gonna get like, you know, the Pistoliers will charge in and kill my cannon. So. But, you know, regardless, at the end of the day, it wasn't terrible. But the Reiksguard do kind of get around my flank. I did have High King Thorgrim here, kind of protecting. Oh, just look at him deck that Reiksguard. But thankfully, Reiksguard don't have very heavy AP themselves. So against Thunders, they do a little bit of damage, but it wasn't enough to, like, really devastate them. And they're going to get back online pretty quick here. And you can see in the back, Karl Franz over here is kind of pushing in, doing a little bit of work. And there's a lot of axes flying in after him. You know, the Rangers, Althar's Rangers are just so good against Empire Lords. But right now, you know, my cannon crews are even fighting. You can see some of these Slayers are dragging down these Reiksguard into the pits with their furious Mohawks. And things are looking pretty good for the most part. The Pistoliers are still trolling. Over here on the far side, he does have the silver bullets doing pretty well. I was able to intercept the Steelers Company over here with some Dwarf Warriors, but you always forget that the Free Company Militia actually have 35 melee defense and pretty good melee weapon you know, combat stats. So in the front, still just fighting tooth and nail, but for the most part, you can see that the Empire Greatswords are starting to get thinned out. Their front line's really getting worn down, and of course, not having that like leadership presence is definitely really, really tough. And Karl Franz over here is having to run. He's taking that perpetual fire from the Raiders and the Thunders. Although my opponent's doing a pretty good job, even using the Pistoliers and melee to ride in there and pressure my range troops, he was able to shut down both my cannons. But Thorgrim back here is doing an excellent job just kind of beating these guys down. But Karl Franz does pull back a little bit and is able to chase off a group of my pretty tattered Thunders, which is a little bit unfortunate. But I do have the Rangers in hot pursuit, which definitely is not a good situation for him. So Karl definitely needs to be careful of this. But he does get these guys off the battlefield, so not a bad situation there. So the Raiders are coming in pretty hot. Unfortunately, their axes are on cooldown. But guys, this is the moment of truth. These Raiders are just going to be heroes going down in the halls of the dwarves or whatever it is. But they get that great throwing axe and they just deck Karl. He just goes down hard and just tumbles on the ground. So just true heroes here, just taking out the mighty Karl Franz. And it looks like at that point the rest of the Empire army is going to collapse. So pretty good play. Well, I wouldn't say play per se, but pretty good action here from these Raiders. And the Thunders also did pretty good. I really like the Napoleonic DAWI build against the Empire. Granted, I don't think my opponent had the most competitive build. It was a little bit more of an innovative type build, like using Pistoliers. And even though they're, you know, arguably one of the most terrible units in the game, like they still had a bit of a niche here and were able to do quite well at, you know, dealing with my my Slayers. Something I would have liked to have seen from my opponent is maybe like cut like 3 Greatswords, right? And get a few Halberds, get a Lore of Life caster, get Lore of Life. That would have made that front line really sustainable. And Halberds have pretty good AP for how cheap they are and high melee defense. So they can really stand and trade with a lot of Dwarf infantry. And they also won't suffer as much against the Longbeard. So that's just my 2 cents. But regardless, very well played to my opponent. Said game 93. Look forward to seeing you again on ladder. And hope you guys enjoyed that Dwarf cast. Have an excellent night and take care.